Hi lovely ones, I'm going to take you on a little constitutional around my mum's client's garden because she's got ever such a lovely garden. It's absolutely beautiful. So we'll go and see what we can see, and I just thought I'd talk to you a little bit about a few things that have been on my mind lately. I was thinking recently about pantheistic belief. As many of you will already know if you've watched my channel for any length of time, I identify as a pantheist, and I have done for quite a few years now. Look at this tree. Isn't it stunning? That is the kind of majesty that 100 royal families could never replicate, in my humble opinion. What I wanted to talk about was that I've always identified as a monistic pantheist. Being a monistic pantheist means that you believe that everything is one, that everything's made of the same stuff, which is quite scientifically viable now. But it's kind of made me realise lately, thinking about it, that this is problematic for me in a sense, because when we think about the transcendentalists, the Buddhists, etc., and the way they think of everything as being spirit, and the way they think of matter as being to do with consciousness, you know, kind of like an illusory web, if you like, and a lot of people kind of thinking that the spirit is what's true and the spirit is what remains. And even, you know, some people just believing that we are actually just projecting this universe as part of our consciousness. And then you think of scientific pantheists as believing that everything is matter, that there is no spirit, that essentially we are matter and consciousness is a product of matter, and that when we die, our atoms kind of change shape and become something else, but there's nothing else to it. Which is problematic for me, because that's not what I believe. I believe in the world of matter and the world of spirit, and I believe that they dance together quite nicely, like a marriage of thunder. But I don't necessarily believe, I suppose what you'd say is I'm a dualistic pantheist in a sense. I believe in everything that I'm looking at right now, but I also believe that there are subtle energies that we have not yet been able to scientifically process, and I believe there are lots of things going on that we've not quite gotten a handle on yet. And it's kind of surprised me reading My Life as a Pantheist by Shamanat Russell at the moment, that she's kind of, I mean, she's a scientific pantheist, and she's talked about how magic and so on, and kind of the ideas of other realms go against the grain of her specific pantheistic belief, because they're not backed up by science, which is kind of surprising to me, because largely actually they are backed up by science. Just need to dig a little deeper to get there. Oh wow, stained glass windows in the old summer house. That's really quite beautiful. I wonder if I can get through there without breaking my neck. I'm very attracted to stained glass, actually. My father's side of the family were Irish Catholic. I used to love going to mass with my nana and looking at all this kind of thing. I still feel very reverent in Catholic churches even now. Labels are really not as important as we think they are. Every so often I'll see the debate come along, particularly online, about whether or not there's a specific amount of credence that can be lent to deeming yourself a traditional witch, and talking about, you know, this whole debacle about what constitutes a traditional witch and why it's important to label yourself thus and think of yourself in that way. But I suppose what I really wanted to talk about is, first of all, I don't consider myself traditional at all, and I have no issue with anyone who does take that moniker. I think it's great to know who you are and know what your practice involves and know why it's important to you, definitely. But I think that a lot of undue importance is placed on the divisions between us, which should actually be energy that's directed into looking at the beliefs which we all hold dear, if you see what I mean. Maybe that sounds a bit hippie to some of you, but that's kind of where I'm going at the moment with that. I feel like we just sometimes, when we start to assert our own set of beliefs and we start talking about why they kind of trump other beliefs, or are more important in a sense, or are more raw, or involve more connection to the universe, I think what we do is we're missing out on prime opportunities to talk about the ways in which we all have some common objectives. Hello. Okay, I'll have a little break now. A little sit down. So yeah, I don't consider myself to be traditional. I've never considered myself to be walking an earth-based path. I think that sounds quite restrictive to me and quite reductive. I think I'm walking a universe-based path, and I think anyone who's pantheist would probably say that, you know, they feel similarly. They feel like that's how they have to identify. I don't know if anyone that's watching this knows what's going on in Myanmar, or Burma as it used to be called, but there are Buddhist monks in Myanmar right now talking about the necessity of slaughtering Muslims. They have a minority Muslim population there, and you know, they live segregated from the Buddhists largely, and there are murders taking place, there are beatings taking place, there are Buddhist monks, you can watch footage of it online, Buddhist monks dressed up in their garb with their shaved heads, beating Muslims, beating innocent Muslim civilians to death. And there's one particularly prominent Buddhist in Myanmar, I can't remember his name right now, and I'd be loath to give him the publicity, to be honest with you, because he does court publicity quite a lot actually. He has a very active Facebook page and he has a team to update it. So he is quite the showman, and he gives lectures at the moment on the importance of curbing the Muslim population in Myanmar, and he talks about them, I believe at one point he said something like they are like jackals. When there's too many of them together, they get out of control and they start murdering other populations, and they need to be tamed, and they're not civilised and so on. This is the kind of disgusting rhetoric that this guy is putting about, and he's a Buddhist monk. So when we talk about Buddhism being a peaceful religion or a peaceful philosophy, we have to accept that that's not the case. We have to accept that there are no peaceful religions, and there are no superior philosophies. There are no religions that it would be better or worse to follow. There are simply people who want to align themselves with good, and people who want to align themselves with destruction, and with the idea of separation, and with the idea of superiority. And, you know, it shocks me and sobers me that there are Buddhist monks talking about having to curb the Muslim population and beating Muslims and stuff. I mean, this is really shocking to Westerners who kind of perceive Buddhism as being comfortable to slot into whatever religious path they follow. I mean, there are Christians now that meditate, and there are witches who have Buddhas on their altars, and you know, it's considered to be a peaceful and well-rounded philosophy which just teaches you how to live well. And I think the Buddha said himself something along the lines of, anger will not hurt someone else, it will hurt you. And it surprises me intensely that these Buddhist monks in Myanmar, who are spewing rhetoric of hatred and division, haven't gotten a handle on that message. And here I am, a Western pantheist chaos witch, and I have a perfect handle on that message. And it just kind of strikes me as really scary that this is happening over there. And my point that I'm getting to, clumsily and not very articulately, is that labels don't matter a jot. They do not matter a jot. It doesn't matter if you're an earth-based witch and you're a hedge witch and you make spells with plants and you're completely in tune with the cycles of nature. It doesn't matter if you look more at the sky than you do at the trees. It doesn't matter if you're more into the occult than you are into the naturistic side of things. It doesn't matter whether you think Crowley is a god or a scoundrel. All of these things are really not important when we look at the individual attitude of the spiritualist at hand. When we look at what we think individually and what our goals are individually, labels just really aren't as important as we think they are. And I think that when people become overtly concerned with what kind of label witches are putting themselves under, I think there's an underlying sense there of wanting to belong to a tribe, wanting to feel like there are more people that are doing what you're doing, that are on your side, that are with you, that get what you're trying to say. And I think it can be kind of a lonely road for people who've chosen their path and find that they don't have as many people on side as they'd like to have, or they feel that their path has done them a lot of good, so they would hope that other people would adopt it too. But I don't think that the label matters. I really don't. And I think that my dancing around the issue of whether or not I'm a monistic pantheist or a dualistic pantheist is kind of like a private form of self-involvement. I don't think it actually matters on a large scale what I believe. I mean, what kind of label I assign to what I believe. Pantheists often have a lot of problems with the notion of prayer, and this is because we don't believe in interventionist beings as such. So prayer to a lot of people is kind of like some form of petition. It's a way of asking for something. And that's the way a lot of people see prayer. That's kind of where a lot of people are stuck with the idea of prayer, that it's asking for something, it's petitioning for something, or communing with something bigger and above and beyond yourself, which is not part of you. But I think prayer is much more holistic and all-encompassing than that, and that's what I'm starting to really realise, is that when I sit with a tree, or when I sit in meditation, when I sit at my altar, when I give myself time to open up to the divine and to look at how it reflects in me and from me, that is prayer. That is what I'm doing. And I love the word prayer. I've always been really antsy about it because of that kind of perception that it's a petition of some kind. But now I'm getting more used to the idea that actually I'm in prayer every single day. I'm just acknowledging the divinity within and without, and I'm acknowledging the link between the two. Like in ritual, you would acknowledge the link between the conscious and the unconscious realms. And I feel that's very important. I feel that's central to who I am as a spiritual being. Ritual is my bread and butter. It's my meat and potatoes. It's the core of what I do in practice. And I think in much the same way, I'm doing the same thing when I'm in quiet contemplation, or when I'm acknowledging the holy web, the all of which I'm an intrinsic part. And I do work with various different gods and goddesses from a soft polytheistic perspective. So basically I see them as mirror images of human life, mirror images of the human psyche, archetypes which run through us all, different creative expressions of different parts of nature, for which we feel an incomprehensible but undeniable awe. And that's why I love acknowledging and working with and thinking about different deities. I absolutely love it. And it does confuse some people to hear that I have a matron deity and that I love all these different gods and stuff, because I'm a pantheist. So to a lot of people it doesn't make sense. But when I explain it, and when I explain that it's much easier to get in touch with your reverence for nature when you have a specific symbol which has been given power by countless generations of human imagination and human reverence and human spirit. These images and these gods and these names have been invested and imbibed with a great deal of power, and I tap into that power through communing with them in some sense, and that's how I tend to find worship potent. I find it at its most potent. For example, I'm really interested in the crone aspect of the goddess triad, because I feel like focusing on and working with goddesses like Hecate and Hel kind of tap me into those parts of nature which I'm most invested into and which most link with my personality and which I find myself thinking about more often than not. So the crone aspect is important to me. And, using personifications, using embodiments of those aspects of nature to which you are drawn is very helpful. And I really believe, that the human imagination is a real place. I don't think it should be denigrated. I think it's a real realm, and I think it has just as much sway, just as much power. That's why I put so much credence into my dreams, because often they are archetypal, they are symbolic. I am getting a message from spirit. I really believe that. So where was I going with that? So I use these gods and these deities, and I work with them and so on, but I don't petition to them. I don't think they're listening to me. What I'm doing when I'm looking at an image of Hel and I'm working with Hel, for example, in the Samhain ritual, Hel is quite sort of heavily involved with that ritual for me. I'm actually looking at the way she reflects who I am and what I'm going through, and my inevitable demise and the inevitable restructuring of my atoms. I'm acknowledging that at cellular level, I'm just a bunch of vibrating bits of matter, and I really feel like I'm kind of linked in very closely with my feelings about death and with the spiritual significance of death and so on when I'm communing with the crone aspect in any way. So that's what I'm doing it for. I'm not doing it to petition. I'm not doing it to ask for anything. I'm not doing it to be heard or to be listened to or to be recognised. I'm just doing it to look at a mirror image of what I am in my most potent aspect, I think. That's what I'm doing. I feel like there's a big old crone lady within me, and when I'm looking at hell, I'm looking at a reflection of something within me, of an archetype deep within me with which I want to get in touch, and it's the one that I want to get in touch with most often. Like, a lot of people love to work with kind of like the mother aspect, I suppose you could say. They like to work with Gaia and Aphrodite, and they like to focus on the primal feelings of love and compassion and growth and fertility and stuff. And I like to work with the dark goddesses. I like to work with goddesses that embody death and destruction and change and rebirth and all of those things, fear, war, that kind of thing. Because I feel like they reflect the most potent parts of my soul. It's just the individuality of practice, but I don't think there's any significant difference. I don't think one thing is better than another thing. I think what we really need to focus on is, are the intentions good, regardless of anything else? And I think a lot of the questions that people have when these debates come up about the difference between traditional witchcraft and eclectic witchcraft or new witchcraft, or kind of like, I don't know, light working and all that kind of thing, I think a lot of these questions and a lot of this discussion is exploratory in nature and is absolutely not intended to be offensive in any way, and it's just people kind of putting it out there that they notice, you know, that different people want different things and different people kind of focus on different things, and isn't that interesting? But I think there's another aspect which is quite dangerous to this debate about traditionalism, and that aspect is with regard to attempting to have a handle of superiority or to feel in some way like your practice is more legitimate. And I think one needs to ask themselves why they might feel that need for that extra little bit of legitimacy. Because we can never know another person's path. We absolutely can't. We're walking our own, and where our focus needs to be placed is on our own. And I think at the point where you start placing more focus on someone else's, you need to ask yourself why that might be. You really do. Check out this doorway. Little bit of topiary there. So yeah, I think really what I'm trying to say is that as I get older and I progress with my path more and more, I realise that labels and words are just things that we assign to ourselves to make things easier for us. It's the same way with stuff like mental health, okay? You use certain words, but you know that you are not owned by those words. You know that those words do not completely define who you are to the letter. They don't sum up your entire human experience with your mental health issue. They simply help somebody to identify quickly what your key issues are. And the same with any physical ailment you might have. Obviously, the name for your physical ailment does not sum up your human experience of that ailment, not in any world, and it shouldn't. And any doctor who kind of tells themselves that it does is not a doctor that's worth their salt. Obviously, the human experience and the variations between human experiences are what really count, and we need never discredit them. However, the labels are just useful. They're useful monikers to help people get in touch quickly and easily with the long and short of what's going on. But then, of course, we need to discuss individual experiences and individual perceptions and stuff. I think that's what's really important, is that we need to make sure we don't give too much power and too much credence to these different labels, because really what we're doing there when we give them too much power is we are allowing them to define and separate. And it's not really about separation, it's about putting more focus and more energy into looking at the places where our paths meet and shaking hands when we have those meetings and enjoying it and relishing it. Enjoying the ways in which we are all one, and whether or not I am in fact a monistic pantheist, or whether I am, as I'm beginning to believe, a dualistic pantheist, I know that the reason that I was so attracted to the whole idea of monism is because I believe in prana, I believe in Brahman, I believe that we essentially as human beings are all one. We all have that same dose of life force running through us. So now coming to understand from a more scientific perspective that actually I'm not a monistic pantheist, I'm dualistic in the sense that I believe in the world of matter and the world of spirit. I'm just evolving with my path, and I'm enjoying that evolution. I'm not worrying about it. These lettuces look a bit sad. I think they've been eaten by caterpillars. Bless them. Runner beans look healthy though. So yeah, I'm enjoying that evolution, and I'm not focusing too much on what was past. I'm putting my best foot forward and looking at what I'm learning now and enjoying what I'm learning now. I'm not worrying too much about where I fall on the spectrum of things, and I think that's most important. And I think it's really important when we're talking about spirituality that we honour individual experience more than we honour the word that we may choose, to help ourselves and each other understand what we're associated with and what really flicks our switch and what we are most turned on by. Those labels are just useful. They're just useful. They're not the whole animal. And I think that's really all I wanted to say at this point, guys. Blessed be.